Hey traveler, welcome to Whispered Sleep Tales. I'm so glad you're here. This is your little corner of calm where soft rain, gentle stories, and quiet voices help you unwind. Tonight's journey is called The Dress I Never Wore, a romantic tale of memories, missed chances, and healing. So, dear, get comfy, close your eyes if you like, and let's begin. Have you ever kept something for someday, and then that day never came? You'll see. This story is for hearts like yours. Now take a deep breath, my friend, and let it all drift away. The night before I moved out, I opened the old closet I hadn't touched in years. You know the kind. Tall, wooden, creaky, smelling faintly of lavender and something like memory. I wasn't really searching for anything. I was just letting my hands wander, letting the silence stretch between me and the years that had piled up quietly in corners I no longer cleaned. That's when I found it. The dress. White. Carefully folded in plastic. Hidden beneath a winter coat I hadn't worn since the last snowstorm in the old apartment. I remember buying it. Not with excitement. Not with joy. But with a kind of reluctant hope. The kind you feel when you're smiling in a mirror, but your heart feels like it's holding its breath. He never showed up. Not at the altar. Not at the airport. Not even in the form of an explanation. He just disappeared. And somehow, I never threw the dress away. It's funny how we hold on to things we swear we've let go of. As if keeping the object means we haven't entirely lost the feeling. That night, I sat on the hardwood floor, dress in my lap, the rest of my life stacked in brown boxes around me. The wine I was sipping had gone a little warm. Outside, a siren passed by, slow and distant, like a sigh from the city. I didn't cry. Not anymore. I just stared at the fabric, at the way it shimmered softly, even in the dim light. And I asked myself why had I never worn it? Not just because the man didn't show, but because maybe I had never really imagined myself as the kind of woman who wears a white dress and smiles in photographs. That's when it happened. A thought, gentle and sudden, like a feather landing on your shoulder. Take it with you, not to a wedding. Not for anyone else, but for yourself. You see, I'd already bought a ticket. One way, Italy. No plan. No schedule. Just away. Away from the job that felt like a treadmill. Away from the apartment that had seen more silence than music. Away from the echo of a life that didn't quite fit. And suddenly, I knew. This dress, it had to come. Not because I needed to wear it, but because something in me needed to make peace with it. I folded it gently into my suitcase, between linen shirts and an old sketchbook I hadn't touched since college. And I whispered, "You'll see the world with me now." It felt silly, like talking to an object. But maybe I wasn't just talking to the dress. Maybe I was talking to the girl who once thought she needed someone else to make her feel chosen. I slept that night on a mattress without sheets. The last of my things packed. A single lamp glowing. And in my chest, not sadness, not regret, just a strange kind of peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to rewrite a chapter and instead turn the page. Tomorrow, I'd leave. The dress would come too. And we would begin. Not again, but anew. The first morning in Amalfi smelled like citrus and sea. I opened the windows of my little rented room, and the breeze came in like a soft greeting, warm, salted, carrying the scent of lemons so vivid it almost felt yellow. I hadn't planned to end up here. But the woman at the train station, her name was Marta, I think, told me, "Go to Amalfi. It's quiet this time of year. It'll let you breathe." So I did. That morning, I stood barefoot on the tiled floor, still in my oversized shirt, sipping weak coffee that somehow tasted better because the mug was chipped and the light was kind. I unpacked slowly, one shirt at a time. The sketchbook, a novel I probably wouldn't finish. A scarf that still smelled faintly like the lavender drawer at home. And then the dress. I unfolded it like it was made of story. Laid it gently across the bed. The lace at the neckline was still intact, but something about it had changed. Or maybe something in me had. I didn't feel pain when I looked at it now. Just a quiet sort of curiosity. Like opening a letter addressed to a past version of yourself. Later that day, I wandered down to the cliffs. The path was carved into the rock, winding like a ribbon unraveling through time. Everything was blooming. The lemon trees bowed heavy with fruit. The air was rich and golden. I passed an old man pruning vines. He looked up and smiled with his whole face. I smiled back and said, "Buongiorno," with the softest accent I could manage. He pointed to a tree and said, "Troppa bellezza, even the lemons blush." I laughed. And I thought of him. The one who had disappeared. Not with sadness, but with the kind of distance you feel when looking through an old photograph, familiar, but no longer tender. In the evening, I took the dress and hung it on the wooden hook by the window. It moved gently in the wind, like it was remembering something too. I didn't try it on. Not yet. But I sat beside it, on the edge of the bed, watching the last light touch the lace like a secret. And I whispered something silly into the dusk. We're not broken, you and I, just paused. Outside, the lemons glowed in the twilight. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Just breathing. Just here. Just me. And that was enough. Venice arrived beneath my feet like a sigh. The kind you don't notice until it's left your chest a little lighter. I arrived by boat, naturally. There is no other way to properly enter a city that floats on memory. The canals were quieter than I'd imagined. Off-season, the gondolas moved like ghosts. And the water green, still, knowing reflected the sky like it was remembering something soft. I wandered without a map, past little bridges and balconies overrun with drying linens and impatient flowers. That's when I heard him. The sound drifted from a corner of Campo Santa Maria Formosa. Low, aching notes from a worn accordion. The kind of music that feels like it knows what it's like to have a heart that once cracked and never quite sealed. He was older. Gray curls tucked beneath the cap. His coat was faded navy, stitched at the elbow, and his shoes looked like they danced too long in too many seasons. I stopped. Saturday on the stone steps across from him. He didn't look up, not at first. Just played, slow and reverent. The melody made my chest ache. When he finally did glance my way, his eyes held the sort of sadness that no longer needed explanation. I smiled. He nodded. Then, between songs, he said in careful English, "This city, it holds the sound of everything I lost." I didn't know what to say. So I asked, "Do you play every day?" He nodded. After she passed, I stopped speaking. But music. He glanced at the accordion, his fingers resting gently on the keys. Music is the only love letter I still dare to write aloud. My eyes burned. But I didn't cry. Not then. He played another piece. It was gentle, full of pauses, like a voice trying to remember how to say, "I miss you," without falling apart. When he finished, I walked over, placed a small coin in his open case. But he shook his head. "No," he said, "not from her." I didn't ask how he knew. Instead, I sat back down, watched the light shift over the worn stones, and listened. For that hour, I didn't feel alone. And neither, I think, did he. When I left, the melody followed me through the alleys. clung to the hem of my coat. That night, I hung the dress across the back of the chair, as if it too had listened, as if it too understood. Some love stories are never spoken, but they play on. In chords, in wind, in water. And if you're very still, you can almost hear them. Florence was light spilling through centuries. Warm, golden, heavy with memory. I stayed in a quiet artist studio tucked behind a rusted green gate. The building leaned like it had been listening to too many stories over too many years. The owner was a woman named Allegra. She wore paint in her hair and silence like a shawl. She didn't ask why I came, and I didn't offer the truth. On my second day there, I wandered the studio while she stepped out. Curious fingers, a childhood habit I never unlearned. There was a low shelf by the window, filled with clay works bowls, pictures, half-finished sculptures. One in particular caught my eye. A tall ceramic vase, delicately painted with winding blue flowers. When I reached to touch it, my coat sleeve snagged. It fell. And broke. The sound echoed like shame. I stood frozen, heart racing, staring at the shards as if they might rearrange themselves. Allegra returned not long after. She saw the mess. The guilt must have been visible in my breath. "I'm so sorry," I said, voice thin. "It was an accident." She bent down, gathered the pieces gently, one by one. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were soft, tired. "That one," she said, "I made after my divorce. I hated it." I blinked. "You hated it?" She nodded, and then smiled for the first time since I arrived. Funny thing. Sometimes we hold on to broken things just because we made them. Not because they're beautiful. She picked up a shard with a painted leaf on it. Now that it's broken, I might finally make something new. We sat on the floor for a while. Quiet. I watched her begin rearranging the pieces. Not to glue them back, but to see them differently. I thought of my own life. Of things I'd clung to, long past their meaning. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Loss is not always an end. Sometimes it's the only way we make room for shape to change." I fell asleep beside the smell of clay and turpentine, and dreamed of blue flowers blooming out of broken ground. The scent moved like an old lullaby, gentle, rippling, forgetful. I walked alone along the Pont des Arts, where love locks clung to the rails like metallic prayers. Some were etched with names, some with initials. some rusted shut. And then I saw it, a single lock, polished and clean, but without a name. No carving. No mark. Just locked. I don't know why, but I stopped. Something about it felt familiar. It reminded me of the kind of love you don't get to speak out loud. The kind you carry in your coat pocket. Hidden. Years ago, I had a love like that. He was older. Married. We never kissed in daylight. Never took photographs. Never said I love you with our mouth. But our silences, they knew. He once told me, if you were a city, you'd be Paris before sunrise. I smiled. Then asked, quiet? He shook his head. Number. Sacred. That was the last thing he said to me. Sometimes, secret loves leave the loudest echoes. I stood there for a long time, fingers brushing that nameless lock, as if I might leave my memory there too. Not to forget, just to let it rest. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I let the quiet hold me. And in the morning, I crossed the bridge again, but didn't stop. Lyon was colder than I expected. The kind of cold that makes you walk slower just to listen to your own breath. I wandered into a second-hand bookshop tucked between two shuttered cafes. The kind with shelves that leaned a little, as if tired from holding too many forgotten things. The air smelled of old paper and someone's past. I ran my fingers along the spines until one book slid out too easily. A pale blue cover. No title. No author. Just soft fabric worn smooth by time. I opened it, expecting pages. Instead, I found a letter. Folded once. Yellowed. The ink slightly faded, but still legible. It began simply, to the one I never stopped waiting for. I read it standing there in silence, as if it had been meant for me. It told of a train missed in the spring of 1986, of a promise made beneath chestnut trees, of a woman who waited every Sunday for 7 years. It ended with, if you find this, I hope you know some love letters are meant to stay unsent. My fingers trembled slightly as I folded it back. I didn't take the letter. Didn't even buy the book. But I walked out of that shop feeling as if someone had told my story years before I ever lived it. That night in my hotel room, I wrote a letter of my own. I didn't address it. Didn't sign it. I just slipped it into the drawer beside my bed, hoping someone else might find it one day and wonder if it was theirs. The train to Zurich left just after sunrise. The compartment was nearly empty. Just me, my suitcase, and the rhythm of the track. He got on 2 stops later. A man in a dark coat, with eyes that looked like he carried a long winter inside. He nodded as he sat across from me. We didn't speak for a long time. Sometimes silence is safer between strangers. He had a book in his hands, but never turned a page. I had a journal on my lap, but never opened it. The mountains passed by, cloaked in soft mist. A lake appeared like a secret, nestled between pine trees. He finally spoke, his voice barely louder than the train itself. "You look like someone who's leaving something behind." I didn't answer. He didn't expect me to. Then he said, "I'm not good at beginnings, but I'm even worse at endings." I smiled faintly because I knew exactly what he meant. He got off before Zurich. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look back. I watched him disappear into the crowd on the platform, like he had only existed between 2 train stations. And yet, even now, sometimes when I hear the low hum of a passing train, I think of him. The man who never turned a page, but still told me something I didn't know I needed to hear. I walked into the cafe in Munich with no real purpose, just the need to get out of the cold. The air was thick with winter, but inside the cafe, it was warm. There was something about it that felt like time stood still. No clocks on the walls. Not a single watch in sight. I ordered a coffee, sipping it slowly, the bitterness cutting through the sweetness of the moment. And then, just like that, I was invited to a poetry reading. A small group of strangers gathered around a table, each with a piece of paper in hand. I didn't want to. I wasn't prepared. But somehow the words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. I told them about the man I almost married, and how we never really said goodbye. How love had slipped away between the cracks of promises we couldn't keep. And for the first time, I cried. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a storm of emotion. Just a quiet release, like rain falling softly on a window pane. The others said nothing, but I felt their presence, their silent understanding. When I was done, I didn't feel better. But I didn't feel worse either. I didn't know it then, but it was a turning point. A small shift. The kind that only happens in places without clock. Time had been suspended in that little cafe. And somehow, for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The city of Vienna, with its grand opera houses and elegant streets, had always been a dream. But as I stood outside the opera house, my heart was heavy with something I didn't expect. I heard a song. a familiar melody drifting from somewhere in the distance. It was a tune I hadn't heard in years, but as it wrapped around me, I knew it immediately. It was our song. The one my ex-fiancé used to sing to me, softly, at night, when the world felt quiet and safe. I hadn't thought about it in so long. But as the song played, memories rushed in. The way he held me, the way he whispered promises that I couldn't hold on to. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me, and for a moment, I wasn't in Vienna at all. I was back in that small apartment, listening to him sing, wondering how I had ended up here. The music played on, but it felt like the world had stopped. I felt as if I could reach out and touch that past, hold it for just a second longer. But then, the song ended, and the past fell silent. I stood there, feeling a lump in my throat, my chest tight. I didn't know if I was ready to face it all again, but in that moment, I realized I didn't need to. That song, once full of longing, now felt distant. A part of my past that I could let go. I turned away from the opera house, the evening air cool against my skin. And with each step, I felt lighter, as if that old forgotten song had set me free. Prague, on the surface, seemed like a fairy tale city. The cobblestone streets, the bridges stretching over the Vltava, the old world charm. But that evening, the storm arrived unexpectedly. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, turning the sky a deep, menacing gray. I'd been walking through the old town, savoring the quiet beauty of the city, when the first raindrop hit my cheek. And then, in a matter of moments, it was pouring. I ducked into the nearest building I could find, which turned out to be a small, old hotel. The kind with creaky floors and brass chandeliers, and a smell of incense in the air. The storm outside raged on, and I found myself trapped inside, with nowhere to go. I sat in the lobby, feeling an odd sense of stillness, despite the fury of the storm outside. The sound of the rain against the windows was almost calming, a rhythm I could lose myself in. That was when I met her. She was sitting at the far end of the room, an older woman with silver hair, dressed in a long black coat. Her eyes were sharp, but there was a softness to her smile, a knowing warmth. She glanced at me, and for some reason, I felt drawn to her, like I had known her forever. "You found shelter from the storm," she said softly, her voice thick with an Eastern European accent. "Storms, you know, they don't just pass outside. They find their way inside you, too." I nodded, uncertain of how to respond. But she didn't wait for me to say anything. "Come." She motioned for me to sit next to her, and something in her presence made it feel natural. She began to tell me a story, one that surprised me with its honesty. She spoke of her youth, of escaping an unwanted marriage in the 90s, and of the courage it took to leave everything behind. She talked about how she ran to Prague, how she lived on her own terms, free from the expectations placed upon her. Sometimes we think we are running away from something, she said with a smile, but what we're really doing is running toward ourselves. Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. I thought of my own journey, my own escape from expectations, and how, despite the freedom I had sought, I still hadn't quite found myself. As the storm raged outside, we sat in silence for a while, letting the weight of her words sink in. And then, without another word, the storm began to subside. I stood up to leave, but before I could reach the door, the woman stopped me. "Remember, my dear," she said, "the storm inside you can calm, just like the one outside." And with that, I stepped back into the wet streets of Prague, the clouds breaking apart and the rain finally slowing. I realized, as the storm faded away, I wasn't just running from something anymore. I was running towards something I hadn't yet understood. Krakow, with its medieval charm, felt like a step back in time. The old town square, the smell of fresh bread and coffee in the air, the streets lined with history. I arrived late one evening, the soft glow of lanterns illuminating the cobbled streets. My footsteps echoed, a rhythm that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. I wasn't sure why I'd come here, but something in the air pulled me toward this place. I stayed in a small, quiet guest house, nestled away from the bustle of the city. It was charming, with wooden floors and mismatched furniture, and a sense of peace that felt like it had been frozen in time. The next morning, I decided to wander around the city, exploring the nooks and crannies I hadn't noticed the night before. It was in one of these quiet streets, between an old bookstore and a cafe, that I found a small antique shop. The shop smelled of aged paper and dust, the shelves filled with forgotten treasures. I didn't expect to find anything, but as I browsed through the stacks of old books, something caught my eye. It was a small, leather-bound diary. Its cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, feeling a strange connection to it, as if it were calling to me. I opened it, and to my surprise, it was filled with handwritten notes. The entries were written in a delicate, flowing script, and as I read, I felt the words speaking to me on a deeper level. The diary belonged to a young woman, a bride-to-be, whose wedding was soon approaching. But as I continued reading, I realized it wasn't just a love story. She wrote about a war, about the chaos that surrounded her, and how, despite the horror, She clung to the hope of a future with her beloved. And then, one entry struck me, a note about a wedding dress she had hidden. She wrote, "I will wear it one day, not as a bride, but as a woman who has lived." It was a strange feeling, this connection to someone I'd never met. It was as if her words were somehow my own. As I continued to read, I found myself overwhelmed by emotion, her story of resilience and loss moving me deeply. I didn't expect to feel so much for a stranger, but there I was, sitting on the floor of an antique shop, reading about a love story that never came to be. The last entry in the diary was dated just days before her wedding. She wrote, "I will wear my dress at the end of it all, not for anyone else, but for me." I closed the diary, feeling the weight of her words on my heart. I hadn't realized, until that moment, that the journey I was on wasn't just about running away. It was about reclaiming something lost, something that, like the wedding dress, I needed to put on, not for anyone else, but for myself. I stood up, feeling a sense of resolution settle over me, and walked out of the antique shop, the diary tucked safely in my bag. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally heading in the right direction. Kyoto, the city of temples and tranquility. The ancient streets whispered stories, echoing centuries of wisdom in every corner. I had arrived in the early morning, just as the sun began to stretch its fingers across the horizon. The air was cool, and the scent of incense lingered in the breeze. I went straight to the temple garden, a place I had heard about in stories, but never thought I'd see with my own eyes. It was said to be a place for reflection, a place where you could leave your burdens behind, even for just a moment. The garden was serene, the kind of quiet that settles into your bone. A small pond, its surface still, mirrored the trees that surrounded it. I sat by the edge, watching the koi fish glide through the water. It was in this stillness that I met her, a young woman with soft eyes and a sadness that seemed to cling to her. She sat down beside me, her presence so gentle, I almost didn't notice she was there. We didn't speak for a while. It was as if the silence of the garden enveloped us, a comfort that didn't require words. Finally, she spoke. "I come here every day," she said quietly, "to find peace, or maybe to lose it." I glanced at her, wondering what had brought her to this place of stillness. "My husband left," she said, as if she had been holding the words inside for too long. "He didn't want to fight for us." Her voice cracked just slightly, and in that moment, I could feel the weight of her heartache. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, just sitting with her in the quiet of the garden. After a few moments, she continued, "I've been thinking a lot lately about the things we hold on to and the things we let go, about what it means to love." Her words lingered in the air, and I found myself reflecting on them, wondering what it meant for me to love, and what I had been holding on to for too long. "I thought love was supposed to be forever," she said softly, as if speaking to herself more than to me. "But sometimes, love isn't forever. And that's okay." There was a quiet acceptance in her voice, and as I listened to her, I felt something inside of me shift. Maybe it was time for me to let go too, to stop holding on to the pieces of a life that no longer fit. We sat there for a while longer, the silence between us now comfortable, almost healing. When I stood to leave, I turned to her and smiled. "Thank you," I said, my voice soft, "for sharing this moment with me." She smiled back, a gentle curve of her lips that reached her eyes. "You'll find peace too," she said, her words as much for me as they were for herself. As I left the garden, I felt a sense of release, as if I had been given permission to move forward, to let go of what was no longer mine to carry. And for the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. Tokyo, the city that never sleeps. But tonight, as I wandered through its neon-lit streets, I felt a quietness in my heart that I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I needed to be somewhere, away from the noise, away from everything I had left behind. I found myself in a quiet neighborhood, far from the bright lights and the crowds. It was a place where the buildings felt smaller, the streets narrower, and the pace of life a little slower. There was something comforting about it, something familiar, as if I had come home to a part of myself I'd forgotten. That's when I saw her, a woman in a red dress, walking slowly down the street. She moved with grace, her presence bold against the quiet backdrop of the city. Her red dress was a stark contrast to the muted colors of the night, and there was something about her that made me pause. She wasn't young, but there was a radiance in her that felt ageless. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her energy, like a flame flickering in the distance. I couldn't take my eyes off her. As I followed her from a distance, I found myself wondering about her life, what stories she carried, what she had lived through to reach this moment. She was alone, but she didn't seem lonely. She was confident, unapologetically herself. I wanted to approach her, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way she seemed to be in her own world. Or maybe it was the way she made me feel small, like I wasn't quite sure of who I was anymore. And then, as if she had known I was there all along, she turned and looked directly at me. Her gaze was steady, but there was a softness in it, a warmth that made my heart flutter. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice calm and knowing. Her words made no sense, yet somehow they felt true. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to say or do, but she smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile that seemed to say, "You are enough just as you are." And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need to be anyone else. I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to be me. She turned and continued walking down the street, her red dress trailing behind her like a trail of fire. I stood there for a long time, watching her disappear into the night, feeling as if I had just witnessed something beautiful, something sacred. I never saw her again, but I would never forget her. The woman who wore red, who reminded me that sometimes the brightest thing in the world is simply being yourself. New York, the city where everything moves fast, where the streets hum with constant energy, and yet tonight there was a silence that felt almost surreal. I had been in Tokyo for days, lost in the endless labyrinth of the city, but something about the quiet of this evening felt different. I was sitting by the window of my small apartment, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance, and I found myself thinking about home, about the life I had left behind, the family I had distanced myself from. I hadn't spoken to my mother in months, hadn't shared a word with her in ages, and the guilt of that weighed on me more than I cared to admit. It wasn't that I didn't love her. I did. But there was something about our relationship that had always been complicated, something that felt too heavy to face, too painful to confront. But as I sat there, staring out at the night, a sudden impulse took over me. I reached for my phone, my fingers hesitating for just a moment, before I dialed the number I knew by heart. The ringing seemed to stretch on forever, each tone an echo in the emptiness of the room. And then, on the other end, I heard her voice. That familiar, soothing sound that had once been a constant presence in my life. "Hello?" Her voice was softer than I remembered, but there was no mistaking it. It was her, and it was like hearing a song I hadn't known I missed. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. What could I say after so many months? So many days of silence? But then, without thinking, I simply said, "Hi, Mom." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, a soft intake of air, as if she were trying to gather her thoughts. And then she spoke. "I've missed you," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "I've missed you so much." The words hit me harder than I expected. They were simple, but they carried a weight of emotion I hadn't been prepared for. I felt my throat tighten, and before I knew it, tears were threatening to spill. "I've missed you too, Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but they were true. So true. We spoke for hours that night, about everything and nothing, about the little things that didn't matter, and the big things we had both been avoiding. But most of all, we spoke about love, and how sometimes it's not about the things you say, but the moments you choose to reconnect. When the call ended, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was as if I had taken a deep breath, a breath I hadn't known I was holding. And in that moment, I realized that no matter where I went, no matter how far I traveled, home would always be there, waiting for me. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet of the city surround me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. I came back to my apartment, the one I had left so many months ago, as if it was just waiting for me to return. The familiar scent of old books and coffee still lingered in the air, and the quiet hum of the city outside felt strangely comforting. I walked through the hallway, passing by the small rooms filled with memories, and made my way into the bedroom. The bed, now neatly made, felt like a place of refuge. But as I sat on the edge, I realized that something was missing. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. The corners of the room seemed to hold memories of a past that felt distant now, of dreams that had once seemed so real, and yet now felt like fragments of someone else's life. I stood up and walked to the closet. It had always been the one place I hadn't touched since I'd left. The closet held everything from my past. Old clothes, shoes I no longer wore, and the box. The box I had never been able to open. It was there, on the top shelf, just as I had left it. The box with the wedding dress. The dress I had once imagined wearing, but never did. I took a deep breath, reaching up to pull it down. The weight of the box in my hands was heavier than I remembered, but as I set it on the bed, I knew that it was time to face what had been left undone. I slowly lifted the lid, the fabric inside pale and soft, like something from a different life. The dress, untouched and pure, looked almost too perfect for the life I had now. I reached in and ran my fingers over the delicate lace, feeling the weight of the past pressing against my chest. But as I held the dress, something shifted inside of me. It wasn't sadness or regret. It was a quiet realization. I had lived through that moment. The moment when I thought I would wear this dress, stand in front of a crowd, and promise forever. But that forever had never come. And maybe that was okay. I placed the dress back in the box, gently folding it as if tucking away a piece of my past that no longer needed to be carried. I closed the lid with a soft click, and for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. I stood there for a while, staring at the box, feeling the weight of all that had been left behind. But it wasn't a burden anymore. It was simply a chapter that had closed, and I was ready to move forward. I walked away from the closet, leaving it all behind. The dress, the memories, the expectations of what I had once thought life would be. And as I closed the door behind me, I knew I was no longer waiting for something to happen. I was finally living my own story. The evening had fallen softly around me. The kind of evening where the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection faint in the dim light, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to look away. The dress, the one that had sat in the box for so long, lay in front of me, folded neatly, its delicate fabric shimmering under the light. I had never imagined I'd wear it like this. Not for a wedding, not for any grand event, but for myself. I reached down and picked it up, feeling the smoothness of the fabric between my fingers. It felt different now, not like something from a dream, but like something that had been waiting for me to claim it. I slipped the dress over my head, the coolness of the fabric settling around me. It was not the dress I had once imagined wearing, standing before a crowd, promising forever. But it was still beautiful, in a way that only I could understand now. I looked at myself in the mirror, the woman I had become reflected back at me. There was no wedding, no crowd, but there was something Elsie quiet strength, a peace that came from knowing I had come this far. I had worn this dress, not as a promise to anyone but myself, but as a celebration of what I had lived through. I stood there, watching my reflection, the dress flowing softly around my feet, and for the first time, I didn't feel incomplete. I felt whole. I closed my eyes and danced, just a small movement, letting the fabric swirl around me, the soft lace brushing against my skin. It wasn't a wedding dance, but it was still a dance of sort, a dance for me, for everything I had been and everything I was becoming. The music wasn't loud, but I could hear it in the quiet rhythm of my movements. A song of freedom, a song of acceptance. And as I swirled in front of the mirror, I realized that this moment, this small, quiet, solitary moment, was everything I had been searching for. There was no need for a grand ceremony, no need for a future promise to wear this dress. The dress was mine now, and so was the journey I had taken to get here. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. I was here, in this moment, whole, and finally, truly free. I stopped dancing, my breath soft and steady, my heart calm. And as I looked at myself one last time in the mirror, I knew that I had come to the end of a chapter. But it wasn't an ending. It was just another beginning. I slowly took off the dress, folded it carefully, and placed it back in the box. It had served its purpose, and now it would rest, waiting for someone else to find it. But I knew I would never forget this moment. This moment when I wore the dress and danced for myself. It had been a long time since I thought about him. Years had passed, years filled with so many things I had never expected. But tonight, as I sat by the window, the cool breeze gently brushing against my skin, I felt it. The pull, the quiet whisper of the past. I took a deep breath and reached for the pen. There was something I had to say, something I had never said before. The words came slowly, almost shy, as if they were unsure of themselves, but they were mine. I started, "Dear Jay," and as I wrote, it was as if I could feel him there again. Not the man from my past, but the man who had once been a part of my dreams. I wrote of everything. The way I had loved him, so fiercely, so completely, and the way we had parted, with no real goodbye. I told him of the years in between, the changes, the lessons, the pain of letting go, and the sweetness of finding myself. But most of all, I wrote of gratitude for the love we had shared, for the lessons we learned together, and for the way he had helped me see that it was okay to be lost as long as I found my way back. I didn't write to ask for closure. I didn't need it. I wrote to say thank you. Thank you for the love. Thank you for the memories. And thank you for the courage to let it all go. As I wrote, I realized that I had let go a long time ago. This letter wasn't about asking for anything back. It was just about finally letting him go completely in the only way I knew how, by letting my words be heard. I folded the letter carefully, placing it into the envelope. There was no need to send it. It was enough that I had written it. And as I sat back, looking at the envelope, I felt a strange peace. The past was still there, but it was no longer heavy. It had become part of me, a chapter I could revisit whenever I needed, but no longer a weight I had to carry. I closed my eyes and let out a breath. The letter was my goodbye, my release, and as I let go of the past, I realized that I had finally made room for something new, something of my own. And that was enough. The evening had turned soft and quiet, a calm that filled the room, and I found myself sitting by the shore, the soft sound of the waves coming in with the tide. I held the letter in my hand, the one I had written to him, folded neatly and tucked away. But this time, there was no need to write to him. This letter was for someone else, for a girl I used to be. I looked out at the horizon, where the last slivers of sunlight dipped below the edge of the world. There was a time when I thought I knew everything, when I believed love was the only thing that mattered, and that everything would fall into place once it did. But life had shown me otherwise. So I wrote to her, to the girl who once dreamed of a perfect love, who imagined that a white dress would be enough to tell the world who she was. I told her about the mistakes, the heartaches, and the moments when she had thought she couldn't go on. But I also told her about the triumphs, the quiet moments of joy she had overlooked, and the way she had slowly begun to understand herself in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. Dear girl, you're stronger than you know, and you don't need to rush to find your place. You don't need anyone else to define you. You are enough, just as you are, even when you feel lost, even when you feel small. I paused, letting the words sink in, a soft smile pulling at the corners of my lips. For once, there was no rush, no need to hurry, It was all unfolding exactly as it was meant to. I wrote to her about the peace I had found, the quiet understanding that life wasn't about chasing after a destination, but about walking through it all, learning, growing, and learning to be kind to myself. Don't be afraid to let go of the things that don't serve you. The ones who are meant to stay will remain, and the ones who are meant to leave will too. Let them. You are not defined by what you lose. You are defined by what you keep inside, the love you give to yourself. As I finished the letter, I let out a soft sigh. The wind picked up, and the sky had deepened into twilight, the stars just beginning to blink into existence. I stood up slowly, feeling the cool breeze against my skin. I took the letter and walked to the edge of the water, letting the waves lap at my feet. I held the letter out and let the wind carry it away, watching as it fluttered and danced, and then disappeared into the night. It wasn't about the letter. It was about letting go of everything I thought I had to be, and allowing myself to just be, to simply exist, with all my flaws, all my dreams, and all the wisdom I had gained from every step I had taken. The wind carried the message of the girl I used to be. She would always be a part of me, but she didn't need to guide me anymore. I had become something new, and I was ready to live for myself, for the woman I was becoming. I smiled softly and turned back, walking away from the shore, feeling lighter than I ever had. And as I took each step, I knew I was walking towards something beautiful. For myself,